We were reading yesterday about quietening the mind. While quietening the mind is little more difficult and a long process, but quietening the phone is easier. So it'll be a good idea to probably just quieten it. So as Savitri begins to look into the cosmic past, she discovers something about the human personality. In the synthesis, Sri Aurobindo describes it as the first step. As we begin to plunge inward, we come to grips with the complexity called man. We have, of course, we always like to oversimplify things and categorize, label. That's how the mind operates. But human beings are innately complex because of the action of the mind and many things, as we shall see. The formation of personality, it starts with just a stream of consciousness out of the inconscient ocean, what is known as in the Rig Veda as Aprakritim Salilam, where there is apparently no nature, but the nature is there but hiding. There arises a subconscious stream of sensibilities, attractions and repulsions, likes, dislikes, etc., etc. Then, as these streams are flowing past, there comes the ego sense which begins to pick up some of these sensibilities, like a little house we make on piece of land. The land is continuous, but we make it discontinuous by taking it that this is mine. Then comes the mind which builds something around it, a fence, a form, and fills it with a kind of self-awareness through thoughts and feelings. All this is on the surface. Just as when we build a house, we go few inches deep and few inches above. But if we look at the totality of creation, our little house and the little self which inhabits it, it's infinitesimally small. So, this is a small little fragmentary personality which forms by the action of the 5 elemental energies, elements, and the action of the mind, the ego sense, and therein a small little stream of consciousness gets locked, as it were. Though it's a continuous stream, but there is a sense of it being locked in a small little space, just as we may say that the earth gets locked in a house. It's continuous, we should not forget it. And earth itself is moving. So Sri Aurobindo describes this personality as a drifting isle, an isle on drifting sands. The sand is continuously drifting, and there is an isle which is as if forming in it. But there is much more that is there. There are hidden ranges, there are higher ranges of consciousness. They are hidden to our surface view. Yet when we withdraw from the surface consciousness in sleep, then this mind begins to travel far and deep. Ordinary in the waking consciousness, the action of the mind is simply like a very busy manager who is constantly receiving reports from the senses. The managers who keep on receiving lot of reports, this, that, there is a whole queue, and every person must be answered. There is a knock, the postman comes, and everything it keeps on categorizing, docketing, putting here and there. And then of course, the memory picks up certain things selectively and forms a habitual pattern out of it. And then we say, this is me. But psychologists say that there are at least 3 selves in us. Of course, they talk about 2 selves, but there are at least 3. One is the personality that we are aware of as ourselves. And it's always colored either by an aggrandizing or a depreciating lens of the ego. So either we are someone very great in our little illusory world, or we are somebody very horrible, or we are swinging between the two. Then there is another personality which others think that we are. That also is colored by the lens of another person's ego. But there is a third personality, the true person actually, which we may say is the psychic personality of which neither of us is aware. And that is hidden deep, deep, deep inside, yet it is the real master. But for a long time it remains hidden, like a crown prince or a small prince, while the mind manages and we take the mind to be the boss. It happens, like let's say in an organization we don't know the CEO or the owner. So we deal with whom? With the MD and whoever is the front person. So we know that person as okay, there is a Malik, there is a owner, but we have only heard the name. Our dealing is with this man, the middleman. Like people forget God and they deal with the priest. For everything they go to the priest. Please solve this problem of mine. Please take out a muhurtam for marriage. I have this issue. Can you solve it? He is only a middleman. There is that God who can do everything, but we are more keen on focusing on the middleman. Now the middleman can be a good trustee or he can be a bad trustee. The role is just a managerial role. But slowly when this little prince grows up, then he reclaims the kingdom. Then the manager has to submit and bow down before him. Now, though people know the front man, the manager, which is the mind, definitely there is some time when this manager reports to the owner what's happening in the company. The owner will always, maybe once a day for a few minutes, and ask him, everything okay? He may just say for a few moments everything is okay, or there is this problem, that problem, and he says, okay, don't worry, I'll take care of it. So every night this mind reports to the owner, the self which is within. It travels from the waking consciousness through the subtle realms and eventually touches the true self. This is where we had stopped, where it gives all its report. And the true self, what does it do? It gives it, don't worry, all is well. So that's the origin of all is well. So it just touches, and touching it, it comes back, okay, fine, I don't have to worry. I can get on to my next errand. And of course, in that small touch, it receives indications, hints, repairs, rejuvenations, many things. As Sri Aurobindo says that those few moments that we touch this core of Satchidananda within us, they are the moments that truly rejuvenate us. And then we go back. The mind goes back and starts the game again. So here is, we continue from that on page 479. We had stopped with this line. He packs or peoples with slight drifting shapes and only a moment spent in silent self. Going through the dream worlds, it eventually touches that core. Adventuring into infinite mind space. Now mind space is itself truly mind-boggling. It's very vast. That's why the mind can continue progressing in many ways. And yet it may be progressing, moving around the same horizontal circle, but it will keep on increasing the circle, increasing it more and more, and it can even create an illusion of progress. Whereas what is happening is nothing but new patterns repeating around the same old story. So that's how the mind can keep on expanding. He unfolds his wings of thought in inner air, or traveling in imagination's car, crosses the globe, journeys beneath the stars, to subtle worlds takes his ethereal course. So this mind is endowed with this capacity to go beyond the form into all kinds of worlds, because it is the formature, it is the power that gives form, and it's possible for it to, through the power of imagination, create new forms, go around, move, mix, imagine. Visits the gods on life's miraculous peaks, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. It doesn't stay anywhere, it goes all around. That's the complexity of our human nature. That everything is there, and at different points the mind goes to different places, different states of consciousness to be more accurate. And that state of consciousness on which the ego stresses itself, we think this is me. But if we really see carefully, we will see that after a moment that state is no more there. It is gone. Then there is another me, yet another me. And so therefore we discover that there are many, many selves within us. And these many selves are only because the mind goes to one place, mostly because of memory and habit, other places because of imaginations and its very nature to explore. And the ego sense attaches itself and says, this is me. So this is how the mind keeps on journeying and travels between various peaks and abysses, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. I find this word tampering a very interesting word, but no, because it cannot tamper with heaven, it can only communicate. But tampering means to disfigure. Now why is Sri Aurobindo using this with hell? Hell is a fairly disfigured thing. But the mind can make it worse. Mind with its perverse drifts can make things much worse than they actually are. And this, the mother repeatedly speaks about that. She gives particular context of a man who after his death had shut himself because his mind was full of guilt that he is a great sinner. So he had created an imaginary hell and he was dwelling in that hell because he is supposed to suffer. All the Puranas say and all the Bible says and Quran says that there is a hell in which we suffer because of sins. Now, quite naturally, all his life the mind had believed it, so after death his mind took him to a world of hell. And mother told him, there is no such thing, come out of it. He said, no, you don't know. I am supposed to suffer in hell. For 1 year he kept rotting in hell of his own making. We know in real life also we do it. We don't have to cross the borders. But there are states of consciousness which are dark. But we associated it with certain kinds of experiences or deeds. The association is so strong. Instead of believing in grace, which can liberate us from everything, we drift toward these worlds or we shut them ourselves, like in the case of Trishanku. Trishanku goes up and down like the mind moving up and down. And eventually what does Vishwamitra do? He says, okay, I'll create a heaven for you because you can't have an entry. This is how heavens can be created. It's an annex he creates. Everything of heaven is there. He says, you go and enjoy. So mind can create sense of heaven, sense of hell. And with hell it can tamper, make it much worse. If you read the description in Puranas, my God, you wonder that somebody who created such hells, something amiss out there. And Sri Aurobindo writes in one of his letter to Sarojini, his sister, that when I read the Bible and heard that those who are sinners, they remain in hell for 6 months, then one day as a kind of reward or kind of recompense or out of compassion, they are sent to North Pole. So all their 6 months they are burning in hell. Then for 1 day they are sent to North Pole to cool on the ice. And Sri Aurobindo says, I have always thought it's a very peculiar kind of perverse punishment because 6 months you get used to that heat and suddenly if you are transported to North Pole and put in ice, it makes it much worse. It's a, not a relief but a punishment. So if you see the description of even our Puranas, Kumbhi Pag, where you held ulta and all these things, now this is the mind which has tampered with it and made it much worse than it actually is. So this, you are boiled in kadai and all these, God knows, horrifying. That's the time I stopped reading Puranas. I said, enough of it. This is too much. But it's there. In every religion we'll see there are heaven, that if you kill people, you will go to heaven, where you will meet virgin girls. Now what a kind of perverse thought it is. As if God values things which we on earth would value. Now these are all created by the mind. It has created its own states of consciousness because mind is a big formature. It can create things and which will look very, very real. So it goes on and goes on picking up material from here and there and makes its own creations. And yet at the end, this is the little surface of man's life. All this journey, all these so-called, traveling here and there, imagining things is largely taking place on the surface. And we make a big story about it. Now see how with Sri Aurobindo, reading Sri Aurobindo, at times, if one is not careful, the words he and she can suddenly change course. Till now the he was mind, the mental being. Suddenly now he is man's life, so it becomes man. So we'll see, this is the little surface of man's life. He is this and he is all the universe. Man is not only this little surface, but the entire universe is within him. In the ancient scriptures it is said that within the pind there is Brahmand. Within a small formation of personality body, there dwells the entire universe in a seed form, in an essence form. All the vibratory modes which are there in the universe exist in a fragmentary personality. He scales the unseen, his depths dare the abyss. A whole mysterious world is locked within. These are, of course, subliminal states. Unknown to himself, he lives a hidden king. So man is actually the master of all this estate. But he doesn't know himself. The king is hidden inside, deep inside. Unknown to himself, he lives a hidden king. Behind rich tapestries in great secret rooms, an epicure of the spirit's unseen joys. What is the king doing? He is enjoying all experience. There is a line in Savitri very powerful about the psychic being. And drinks experience like a strengthening wine. So it all what the surface mind playing with dualities calls good, and all that the surface mind playing with dualities calls bad. Everything it drinks like a strengthening wine. It goes and ends up strengthening it. That little baby grows through everything. He lives on the sweet honey of solitude. Marvelous line. It is alone in that secluded chamber, like the swan on the peaks of Mansarovar. Lives alone. There are not many creatures around. And it eats that lotus honey. So it drinks on the honey of solitude. I mean, it's so true that there can be so much sweetness being alone. The moment this honey gets shared, it gets mixed with the poison of this world, and the joy is gone. Solitude has so much joy in it. Truly, it is the honey of solitude. In a nameless God in an unapproachable fane. Where does man truly dwell? Man as in his true being. He is a God, in fact, greater than the gods. That's why in the Kathopanishad, when Nachiketa asks Yama, tell me the secret of immortality, he says, don't ask me this, even the gods do not know it. He is greater than the gods. If he discovers who he truly is, then he will discover the real temple where sits the unworshipped God. Fane is the unapproachable temple. In the secret editum of his inmost soul, there is the cave within his heart where is seated the one true divine. All others are names and forms and aspects and powers. He guards the being's covered mysteries beneath the threshold, behind shadowy gates, or shut in vast cellars of inconscient sleep. The immaculate, divine, all wonderful, cast into the argent purity of his soul, his splendor and his greatness, and the light of self-creation in time's infinity. So man is not just a surface personality, he is not just the explorations of the mind, but deep inside there is in him a portion of the divine, a fiery portion of the wonderful, artist of its own beauty and delight. It self-creates. All other parts in us, they don't have this power of self-creation. It looks that it's a self-creation, but it's a borrowed light. Just as the moon doesn't have a light of its own. It's a borrowed light from the sun, it's reflected, and we use the word moonlight. So also when mind create something. It is inspired by different planes. It is pushed by different planes and it creates, and we think it is we. But the true self-creator, which can truly create, change the course of things, create the path of destiny, its own course of life, that is seated within, and it is to that the divine pours all his secret beauty, greatness and light. And why does he pour it? So that in time also man may pour out something of the timeless. That is the real purpose of man. That in the psychic being, the mother put it very beautifully. She said, if we take the body as the lamp and the divine as the generator, then the psychic is the wire that connects the generator to the lamp. So, psychic is the connecting link between the divine and this outer consciousness and this waking life, surface life. And the divine pours into it, and the psychic lets it off further for creation. But what happens then? Why don't we have a beautiful creation? Because the mind intervenes and nature intervenes, and nature has countless possibilities inside it. They snatch the light and turn it towards its own purposes, and that we shall see as we go. Because this is the real problem. So of course now we say that government rolls out many beautiful programs, but they never reach the real end user. No, we had in Pondicherry itself, for quite some time all the roads were being dug out. So we thought, okay, some repair is going to go on. Then new roads came up. Then again they were taken out and the old roads came back again. Sometimes you wonder what's happening. But we keep reading in papers that so many 1,000 crores and so many crores. Surely it's released, but never reaches the end user. Why? Because the middle people eat it away and only a small amount reaches. So the middle people in us, the mind and the life and many forces which are waiting, they eat away all that is poured from the divine into the chalice of the secret heart. And very little of it escapes to the surface consciousness, though even that is enough to really lift us high. And yet, one of the works of yoga is precisely that this scattering, this eating away, this dispersion, that must stop. And that's why the stilling, the quietening, the nishkam karma, so that there can be a direct transmission of this light from the divine through the soul onto the surface. Sri Aurobindo describes this beautifully in The Life Divine in the chapter on the triple transformation. A lot of practice of yoga are aimed at this. Of self, his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in time's infinity as into a sublimely mirroring glass. Man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. This is our work. But the problem is, the dreams of God get crisscrossed by dreams of man. So, children are born clear. They are born to work out the dreams of God. But even before they can become conscious of these dreams, there are the parents who have their own dreams, unfinished agenda. Then there are teachers who have hidden agendas to turn the child towards this thought pattern or that thought pattern. So by the time this little child grows up, actually I really feel, watching this incidence of, young children misled, misguided, to what depravity and perversity of thought human beings can be. It's the teachers who needs to be really hauled up, who never taught them how to think with clarity. They mix up all the issues. It's really, now this is how it happens, that something beautiful comes into the world and all these forces start acting upon it and divert the messages and create a confusion in earthly life. So this is, originally man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. This is his purpose. This is why he is born. But unfortunately what we see is not dreams of the divine, but many other things happening other than that. Dreams of the devil sometimes, nightmares, all this happens on earth. So where does that come from? Why does that happen? And now starts a whole section, very powerful in a different way, which reveals to us why man born to work out the dreams of God is unable to do it. It starts with this line, but all is there, even God's opposites. So these fellows are waiting. You cast your dreams, we will see what we are going to do with it. So here is, he is a little front of nature's works, a thinking outline of a cryptic force. All she reveals in him that is in her. So what nature does, says, okay, the psychic receives that dream, transmits. Nature says, all right, come into my den, my ken. And all the forces of nature begin to act simultaneously upon this little persona. Her glories walk in him and her darknesses. Nature is full of all kinds of things. Nature has heights, nature has abysses. Man's house of life holds not the gods alone. This is the problem. This is the real problem. That's why to every problem of existence, Sri Aurobindo eventually gives the answer in transformation. And if the problem is more acute, we should push for this transformation even with a greater urgency. Tampering with the surface, trying to, change things on the surface, that is necessary at one level so that at least the earth remains. It doesn't get destroyed. As Sri Aurobindo says, before God had time to shout. A scientist played with atoms and blew out the earth before God had time to shout. That shouldn't happen, so it is important. But this is not the solution. Even there were sattvic societies, civilizations which are very sattvic, and yet they collapsed after a while. Because the problem is that nature is full of many elements, and unless these elements are transformed, there can be no lasting solution. So here is a description of some of these elements. There are occult shadows. There are tenebrous powers, dark and dangerous powers. Inhabitants of life's ominous nether rooms, a shadowy world's stupendous denizens. We may have a very good picture of ourselves. But as Sri Aurobindo puts it very interestingly in one of his aphorisms, a saint is someone who cherishes his sins in secret. A very, straightforward view of humanity. And another place, it's of course well known to us, put a little more mildly, that every saint has a past and every sinner a future. The whole thing exists inside, the dark, dangerous depths. A careless guardian of his nature's powers, man harbors dangerous forces in his house. So what does nature do? Says, okay, these are the people manage. Imagine, very good. It's the worst thing in life to be in a position of an administrative head. You realize it when you have it. My God, so many human beings of different shades, size, types, varieties, colors, and each one is wanting his own say. So, mind is a very careless manager. It doesn't even know them. And suddenly it confronts this house of nature because mind is at the peak right now. It's the role of a manager. The titan and the fury and the jinn lie bound in the subconscious cavern pit, and the beast grovels in his anterden. Grovels, crawls on four. It just crawls. It's there in the anterden. Long back, this thought used to come to me, and it's so true actually. We live on a neat house and a nice floor, and it's nice, very nice. Just imagine that what would be lying below the floor if you go 10 feet deep, 15 feet deep. There may be even snakes. We don't know. We may never know. That right in my house below, 10 feet below, there may be very creepy creatures. But we become aware of the creepy creature only when it comes into our own room. So there are such beasts. They are tied. The dinosaur is not dead. He is only dead outwardly, but the consciousness of the dinosaur exists somewhere within us. Snake has evolved but continues to exist. That snake consciousness. In fact, if we look at even the brain and the formation of a baby, if you see the formation of a baby, it repeats all these stages. What is it? A little insect. Not a good way to look at it, but initially it's what? It's a unicellular organism, protozoa. Then it becomes a little insect, a worm. Then it grows into a little fish. Then it grows into a turtle. Actually, if you see, you'll see these stages. And then eventually it grows into an ape. Looks like a monkey, the face of a little baby. And then eventually man. If you look at the human brain, they say that there are 3 layers of the human brain. The mammalian brain, the primate brain, which is of course what we inherit, the mammalian brain, and the reptilian brain. They are, placed one upon other. Now reptilian brain, if you see, it looks like a hooded cobra. If you just look at it, and around it grows the mammalian brain, around it the primate, or what we are today. But the reptilian brain is still there with its instinctive reactions, reflexes. So when somebody says something insulting to us, it's not the yogi which steps out, though it should be the yogi, apprentice yogi at least. It is the reptilian brain that reacts, hisses, bites, puts poison through thought, which is much worse. Snake bites and goes away. Usually it cannot, if a snake bites second time, it cannot deliver enough poison. It's, it can bite once, then it takes time to rejuvenate. But human beings can keep biting for hours together. And no antidote to that poison. Snake poison, at least, with either kill you or you survive. 99% you'll survive. But human poison can be so vicious. And sometimes we don't even know. People throw ill will. They don't have to say anything. They just think, oh, this fellow, why something bad has not happened? That's enough. Mother speaks of it. People fall ill. And then they say, look, destiny. God has punished. God has not punished. God never punishes. It's the collective ill will that made the person sick. All these things happen. And they are lying inside, and we have a very neat covering on the surface. So this is the beast groveling in the ant den. Dire mutterings rise and murmur in their drowse. Insurgent sometimes raises its huge head, a monstrous mystery lurking in life's deeps, the mystery of dark and fallen worlds, the dread visages of the adversary kings. So the dark and fallen worlds, what is called as hell, the nether worlds, all these exist. Now, why these worlds became, we have the whole story of involution through which these worlds, and they may be a small portion, but they exist. And there, the 4 kings, the adversary kings, the 4 great asuras of which the mother speaks of, they are just the opposite of the 4 great gods who are on high. And these names are different in different traditions. In the Vedas, they have certain names, these 4 great guardians of light. And the mother has given these names, Sri Aurobindo, and the mother has Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati. And we have the corresponding 4 adversary kings, the 4 great asuras. Death, unconsciousness, falsehood, suffering, and they are there in the darkness, waiting to afflict us. Their action can be, there are people who suffer for no real reason, and you wonder why they are suffering. Because they have come into grips with the action of this darkness. There are people who tell lies at the drop of a hat, not even drop of a hat. You watch the television programs, blatant lies. Even if you show visible proof, denied. No. You just wonder. Open lies. It's just the way they live. It's their food. Falsehood. Unconsciousness asura is still okay. Curable. Death, stalking its victim. Filling our minds with doubts. Creating the sense that denial, there is no divine. It eulogizes death. It eulogizes all that is dark and perverse. Puts it on pedestal of a god. So these are the dread visages of the adversary kings. The dreadful powers held down within his depths become his masters or his ministers. It's difficult to say which is better. If they become ministers, that means the whole being is possessed, like Ravana had many of these Karkatasura and Ahiravan and God knows all kinds of asuras were under him. He was a master of all these demonic powers. And ultimately he fell to whom? A man. This is the story. It's many symbols, but one of the symbol is man has within him this power to even fall an asura whom the gods cannot. Why? Because man carries in him the purity of the psychic light. This is one interpretation of Ramayana. There are many, many others. But one of them is that it's very interesting that asura falls to a man. And yet they are hidden inside, and sometimes they can possess. Enormous they invade his bodily house, can act in his acts, infest his thought and life. This is something very difficult for a democratic view of mind to understand. The modern mind, which is, moved by the ideal of democracy, and it's important in its own place, will have its own say because it's necessary. But what is this problem? Is that all human beings are same and all human beings are equal? Well, the fact is, whether we like it or not, there is a hierarchical arrangement of life. It's a fact we have to reckon with in trees, in everything. But it's equally true that deep inside, in essence, all human beings are same. Both things are simultaneously true. They are different layers of consciousness, and our evolution is on different layers. But it's equally true that deep inside, the bird and beast and stone and man, why only different human beings? We are all same. Now what the asura does, it creates a confusion by reversing the whole thing, and that we shall read now. But now we say that, well, every human being has, equally, and that also a phase mankind has to go through. It's a purging phase when mankind will spew even venom in the name of freedom till mankind realizes that, well, there is a difference in different categories of thoughts. There is a difference between different ways of life. It's not that all ways of life are necessarily equally valid. They may be valid for a time, but there is an evolutionary way of life, and that's what is called as dharma in Indian thought. Dharma is the unfolding of a progressive evolutionary way of living. What is valid at one level is not valid at another level, and this we can see in everyday life. It's the child's dharma to argue with the parents, to push the parents, and even, say all kinds of things. But if he does the same thing at 15, it's not something good and pleasant. Then at 25, if he does the same thing, it may even look cruel. At 50, if a child to the parents, hits them and, old man and deals with them roughly, it will be regarded as outrightly cruel. So there are different stages at which there are different dharmas, and they unfold itself. So sometimes these things come and act in the acts. Inferno surges into the human air and touches all with a perverting breath. Grave forces like a thin miasma creep. It's a very interesting word. Miasma is used in homeopathy. They say that, the deepest maladies are miasmas. This is a word actually used. So that is the real problem. And miasma is like, we may have a house, in Amba Bhikshu, in one of the ashram buildings. And there are other buildings also. It's an ashram building, so nice. People are staying there. But if you stay on to the other side, and if you are on first floor, you will get the stench of nalla. So there is a sewer drain flowing, so you'll get the stench. Your room is clean. You have taken every care. But how do you prevent that stench from coming? We have a garden guest house also. It's a nice guest house, please. But I'm just saying that stench is there because the nalla which is flowing. Mosquitoes come. Can't help it. You can prevent the mosquitoes, but how do you prevent the stench? Now this is the miasma, which is flowing underneath as an undercurrent of life. And time to time it escapes. And it has actually a smell. We can If the sense of smell is developed, by simply smelling, we can know what a state of consciousness a human being is in. Sri Aurobindo speaks about it. And he speaks about these different kinds of smells. And that's why in Indian thought we had an antidote also. These smells draw these forces, corresponding forces. So, with ingenious mind of the Indian, we created agarbattis. We will counter these. So that's why it is said that when you have dhoop and that, what is that, camphor, these things ward away evil spirits. Not a superstition only. Because there is a whole world of subtle smells. And through these smells, you can actually keep away certain forces. Of course, for a short time. You need to do other things. It's not like a possession state will go away. But regularly lighting these things was a means to keep away certain energies and forces. That's what miasma literally means. It's like a sewer drain whose smell is coming up. That's a miasma. Sometimes this smell can pervade, come up. Stealing through chinks in his closed mansion's doors. You close all the doors and windows. Stench will still come in. Why? Because you can't make airtight rooms. One will die. There are chinks, there are spaces through which air will come, and with the air the miasma will come. You see all these. Discoloring the walls of upper mind in which he lives his fair and spacious life. We live in a very nice sadhu bacha image on the outside and project that strengthened image further with robes, white robes, or this orange robe or some other robe. We also wear some nice mala, tilak, spacious life, a very deceptive life. And we are very nice people, but it is there. It's there as an undercurrent of all life. Nobody is exempt from it. Unless human nature is transformed, or we live in an illusion and create an illusion and others believe in this illusion, it's there as an undercurrent of life in everyone. But sometimes it can come up and discolor the walls of our mind. So human beings at least must learn how to keep it in its place. And leave behind a stench of sin and death. When they come into the upper chambers of the mind, they misguide our reason, mislead, all our actions get infested by their presence, and that is dangerous. At least human beings must learn how to keep. There is a sewage drain, we can't do anything about it, but it is in its own place. We don't bring that sewage water and start drinking it as Charnamrit. Some people do it, and that's dangerous. And do it with this idea, all is same. And that is dangerous. So one should know the difference between water from the gutter pipe drain and water that comes from the holy water from the springs of gods. So this is where we don't know the discrimination, then there is a problem. Not only rise in him perverse drifts of thought. Now you see, thought is very important. We think that thought, speech, they are of no importance. Sri Aurobindo says, never give mild importance to idea, because idea will translate into action. So if you support a form of thought, you support a whole series of actions which are going to follow. If I say it's perfectly fine for man to kill another for his bread and butter, I may not kill, but I am in some way also responsible for somebody who kills. And then you say, you are the fellow who gave me this brilliant idea. You say, yes, I gave an idea, free speech, I didn't do anything. Yes, but I got the idea and I did it. Who is more guilty? It's a very difficult thing to say, because somebody released an idea, another person executed it. So we have to watch over these thoughts. That's why Mother says, and all the great mystics have said, watch over your thoughts. These thoughts will precipitate into actions. Actions will become habits. Habits will become personality and a way of life. So at the level of thoughts itself, not only they give rise to perverse drifts of thought and formidable formless influences, but there come presences and awful shapes, tremendous forms and faces mount dim steps and stare at times into his living rooms, or called up for a moment's passionate work, lay a dire custom's claim upon his heart. Aroused from sleep, they can be bound no more. That's why we see even in the action of the divine, there are certain actions which were necessary at a given point of time. They can become also templates. And human beings will follow it without understanding. And that's why many things that the Mother and Sri Aurobindo were so careful about, because they had seen. And they become templates for the future. People don't understand that there is a certain context, there is a certain background, there is a certain consciousness. And yet, actions can become templates. So once these thoughts can come, even sometimes they are necessary for a moment's work. Arjuna, it was necessary for Arjuna to indulge in carnage. And yet, later humanity takes Arjuna's name and justifies. And that's why, one of the reasons I believe why was Gita given. So that Sri Krishna can tell us, look, that is a moment's necessity. But as a guidebook of life, follow the Gita. And the Gita preaches neither violence nor non-violence. It preaches Maitri, Karuna, Ahimsa. These are qualities of a godlike temperament. Strength, Teja, Dhriti, Shama. Look, these qualities. But there was a point of time when Arjuna had to indulge. Aroused for a moment's work. He needed all that passion to fight a war, gory war. Bhima has to do things which are unimaginable. It was necessary. You are dealing with Asuric forces, Rakshasic energy. You can't be a very benevolent God and say, please have your way. Yet that action leaves an imprint. Aroused, they cannot be settled anymore. That is one reason why the Pandavas suffered so much, even though they had done something which was necessary. But yet, once these forces are aroused, the war was no more a typical Kshatriya war. All kinds of things got mixed in it. And so much suffering they underwent because they were basically Sattvic temperament. Very nice people. So they suffered so much that they had to do, Yudhishthir goes away for 18 years, they wander away, trying to find peace. And eventually they even, walk away into the Himalayas because they can't bear that agony. Once these forces are aroused, forces of destruction, carnage, these energies don't go back, or of lust and greed. They don't just, okay, fine, it's a moment. That moment can become a whole life. That's why one has to be so careful. So we'll stop here with these lines. Lay a dire customs, or called up for a moment's passionate work, lay a dire customs claim upon his heart. Aroused from sleep, they can be bound no more. So we'll stop here and continue in the next session.